NYC sees staggering shooting numbers. Top cop warns of storm on the horizon. I've been seeing stories pop up across the country of mass shootings. We apparently had like 100 gunshots fired in I believe it was in North Carolina. We have a story out of Chicago, the worst weekend they've seen all year. I think it's 104 shot, 14 killed. We've got a shooting in Minneapolis. I got a bunch of stories, man. They're all lined up. It's happening everywhere. New York saw 55 shootings in this past week, I believe, up from 18 the year before. And again, a top cop is warning, there's a storm on the horizon. In the movie V for Vendetta, there's a famous scene where the chancellor, if you're not familiar with the movie, it's a futuristic 1984 style dystopia. And the chancellor tells his, top lieutenants, I want them to remember why they need us. And so he instructs them to inundate the media with all of these crazy stories about crime and viruses and things like that. And then people are supposed to feel like they desperately need the government. This is something different, though. And it just reminds me of that point in the movie, because I think what that movie got wrong is you don't need to make up a reason as to why you want to convince people they need you. You need only allow crime to actually happen. And this is my concern. We are seeing something's happening. It could be a perception issue, just like I mentioned with V for Vendetta. That's why I bring it up. It could be that the media is now inundating with these stories of shootings and propaganda to remind us why we need the police. Or it could be that police have been demonized and demoralized to the point where they're not going to respond, or that criminals now have the utmost confidence they will get away with it. You see, when it came to the looting across the country, these people were going around smashing windows and stealing things. You know why? They knew the police were overwhelmed because of the protesters and the political riots and took advantage. So I'm differentiating between the looters and rioters, although they were similar and there was overlap. Looters were straight up driving up to stores in New York, smashing windows, grabbing stuff and running. They knew the cops were overwhelmed. And right now, criminals know police are under fire. And they're demoralized. And that means if enough people want to commit crimes, they can. But take a look at what's going on in Seattle. You actually have a cop-free zone where now we've had, I believe, 3 different shootings, 3 individuals being shot. How many criminals across the country are seeing the police fail to act, calling in sick, or straight up refusing to act, and thinking so long as they're strained and we all commit crimes at the same time, we will get away with it? I imagine it's a lot of people. Let's read the story here and see what's going on and what is this storm on the horizon. That's the line that kind of freaked me out. Fox News reports the NYPD has reported a staggering increase in shooting numbers and injuries as officials warn there is a storm on the horizon and say changes must be made. An estimated 74 people were wounded in 55 shootings citywide from June 15th through Sunday night. An NYPD spokesperson said Monday. The department told Spectrum NY1 it saw 18 shootings for the same time period last year. That's a dramatic increase. Those numbers include a 24-hour period on Saturday that recorded about 24 shootings in that time frame. NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea said Monday morning that skyrocketing shooting numbers are just the latest symptom of a much bigger problem. I hope I'm not the only one. It takes a long time to turn a ship that sees the iceberg directly in front of us. We've been trending this way for a while. Shea was featured on the show to discuss a recent chokehold incident that occurred in Queens over the weekend, which resulted in an officer being suspended without pay while the department further investigated the use of force. But about halfway through the interviews, Shea changed gears, noting that in addition to the officer's use of chokehold, the quality of life nexus concerns him. He outlined the latest shooting numbers and stressed, if people aren't talking about it, they will be soon. We had 100 shootings in May. First time we hit that number in probably 5 years. We were trending up before COVID hit on shooting. The shame of this is I've been warning people since November or December that this is coming. A month or 2 ago, I told you there is a storm on the horizon. I want to stop briefly and say about that chokehold. The officer, in my opinion, deserves to be suspended 100%. And it plays into the bigger story about the storm on the horizon. The reason the officer should be suspended is that he used a banned chokehold. Can't do it, right? But more importantly, If you are an officer right now and you are facing heavy scrutiny from the public because they think you're the bad guy, then do not stick your neck out. I'll tell you what happened. Chokeholds can be appropriate. This officer probably thought duty comes first, politics second. Well, now you're suspended. Now you've put other officers at risk. The challenge, I suppose, is that crime is going to go on the rise unless they actually take the action they think they need to take. But there's no solution other than stand up for yourself. And if they say don't engage, then don't. Let the criminal go. Now, I don't know the full circumstances, so I'll leave it there. But let's keep reading about the storm on the horizon. Shea emphasized the need to have hard conversations about quality of life issues and said, nearly every shooting that occurred over the weekend involved marijuana, alcohol, and dice games. We cannot step away from quality of life policing. And we also need to support our police officers that are out there doing a very difficult job. We cannot expect the police to go out there and fix laws that are broken. We cannot stop our way out. We cannot stop our way out of this problem. We need bad people held accountable. And right now we have a lack of accountability. Just Sunday, NYPD's chief of crime control strategies, who oversees crime statistics and trends in the city, told the New York Post the gun arrests that the police department has made are stalled because courts have been closed as a result of the pandemic. We have over 1,000 people that have been indicted on gun possession charge where the cases are open, and they are walking around the streets of New York today. Roughly 800 more people were charged with criminal possession of a weapon, but have not yet been formally indicted. Now, I have a question. How many people did you release from the jails who were, because of COVID, who are violent offenders? I believe most of the people that were released were not. But how many criminals have been put out, thus increasing the likelihood of crime? I have to imagine enough. Roughly, it's going to be a massive backlog, LePetri continued, we're concerned. As for the shooting numbers for the whole year, an estimated 17% were cases in which the shooter or the victim was a parolee. Well, there you go, LePetri told the Post. We've never seen a higher percentage of parolee-involved incidents with shootings since we began tracking in 2005. Here's a story from NYC. Shootings skyrocket as court closures let pistol perps walk free. And that's what they referenced in that story. So that's one of the reasons, and there are probably a lot of reasons. I wonder what Dermot Shea meant when he said a storm was coming. What storm and why? It was going up before COVID. What's causing this? I honestly don't know. I would believe right now that police demoralization is playing a large role in this. Think about it. You've got a certain individual committing a crime, maybe armed, and you're told that if you do your job, you could have your life destroyed. Not just because you might go to jail for a criminal charge, but because the woke outrage mob might publish your address and threaten your family. Thus, the demoralization is getting particularly severe. But whatever this thing they're talking about is, whatever this storm is, it's happening everywhere. And that's something that needs to be paid attention to. Chicago, 104 shot, 14 fatally over Father's Day weekend in Chicago. 5 children were among the 14 people killed, including a 3-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl killed in separate shootings in Austin on Saturday. Do they mean on Austin? What do they mean in Austin? Chicago saw the highest number of gun violence victims in a single weekend this year, with 104 people shot. The weekend saw more shooting victims but less fatalities than the last weekend of May, when 85 people were shot, 24 of them fatally. Chicago's most deadly weekend in years. Now, this was the last weekend of May. You may recall that was when the riots were erupting. I believe it was after May 24th when the George Floyd protests started and then became riots. I wonder if this has something to do with it. A video has emerged. It's going around. And it shows a police officer pulling over a woman on June 3rd as she stops to talk to protesters. The cops pull her over. She starts filming. The officer says, exit the vehicle, you're being detained. And she says, I didn't do anything wrong. The cop asks her again and says, if you don't, I will remove you. She says, I didn't do anything wrong. That is the wrong answer. Okay, if you can be detained. And if they tell you to get out of the vehicle, you get out of the vehicle. The officer tries to reach his hand through the window. She shrieks. He cracks his retractable baton and shatters the window, grabs her and pulls her out. This video is going viral. And it's shocking. I think the cop went too far. Shattering the window in the woman's face ended up cutting her up and she started bleeding from the mouth. I understand why the officer was on a short fuse, but it doesn't excuse his behavior. But you got to understand what's going on outside. June 3rd, This was when the riots were erupting across the country. I don't think any of these cops are taking chances with anyone. And if they tell you you're being detained, get out of the car, you do it. She didn't. I don't know exactly what ended up happening, but he shattered the window in her face, and he should not have done that. I'm not highlighting this to excuse the cop. I'm pointing out police are on edge. Okay, they're not going to want to respond to calls. I don't know if they're still doing the blue flu in Atlanta, but they did it for 4 days at least. It may still be going on at day 5. They're calling in sick. In one zone in Atlanta, only 3 officers showed up, and 2 of them, I believe, were supervisors. They actually had detectives answering 911 calls because the police are saying no. What do you think happens when the criminals hear the police will not come out? I don't know. Chicago's had some of its worst violence in years in the past couple of weeks. Now going on for a whole month. 5 children were killed. Monday, they describe Monday, Sunday, and Saturday, Friday, non-fatal attacks. It's severe. I'm not going to read through this. You know why? You know why I'm not going to give you the nitty-gritty details on Chicago? First of all, I'm from Chicago, and you know that. And you also know that they call Chicago Chirac. And you're probably thinking, yep, what else could you expect to happen in Chicago? But how about this? 19 victims injured in Saturday morning NYC shootings, NYPD, from June 20th. How about this? 100 plus gunshots in mass casualty incident at North Charlotte block party. How about this one? I got to refresh it because it's NBC. 1 dead, 11 injured in Minneapolis shooting. Is this normal? I don't know. I don't. I really don't. You know why? I can tell you this. We know for a fact the violence in Chicago is worse than it's been in years. What about all these other shootings? Well, in New York, they say it's up 55 shootings from the same time last year, which was 18. So it's definitely way up. Why is all of this happening? Because of police demoralization, right? My concern was with all of these stories, maybe what's really happening is that we normally just don't care. And now we're hearing these stories because we're actually concerned. Maybe now the media is actually reporting on these things. Kind of. But here's the real sad part. Where's the nationwide outrage over Chicago, over children being killed? None. The same people who argue for gun control don't want to talk about these mass shootings. Why not? Perhaps it's because it conflicts with their narrative. The narrative being that the police should be defunded and disbanded. And perhaps it conflicts with the fact that they run these cities. So Minneapolis has a mass shooting. Of course, the media covers it. But the bigger issue isn't so much, you'll hear this a lot from journalists. They'll say, people are always complaining that the mainstream media won't talk about it. And then, you'll see these articles. They do talk about it. They will report it. But what we really mean is the activist class of media that controls the news cycle or manipulates it. When one person loses their life in police brutality, the media makes a collective decision. We're running with this story, and they go nuts. Tony Timpa, I believe was his name, happened way before George, relatively earlier compared to George Floyd. But it didn't make the news. Why? The media didn't want to make it an issue. The activists didn't want to make it an issue, and nobody chased after it. So when it comes to Chicago and all this violence, when it comes to Minneapolis, where are the activists now complaining we need our police back? Where are the activists to come out and start defending the police? They won't do it. They won't. Because their narrative is the police are bad. They've chosen this path. They're running with it. And the rest of us suffer. So long as the media doesn't tell you the problem is happening. Now, of course, NBC News is covering this. Chicago Sun-Times, NBC4, and Fox News, the New York Post. But what I mean is CNN, MSNBC, HLN. These I don't know if HLN still exists. I don't think it does. But these big media outlets, the New York Times, front page, where is it? The Wall Street Journal even. Let's get a national conversation right now on whether or not we need the police. I'm sorry. The New York Times went woke. So now their whole thing is the cops are bad. Don't you understand? Don't you understand how bad they are? And then what happens? Well, bad things happen, right? There is no circumstance in which getting rid of the police will make anyone safer. No. Let's say that the cops are a criminal gang. Let's use their narrative and say the cops are a criminal gang that commit violence and all these things. Will it make the neighborhood safer to get rid of them? No. Even if you believe the worst possible depiction of the police, there is no circumstance where abolishing them makes you safer. That's it. That's it. There's more. I got more stories. Husband killed, wife wounded in shooting in Philadelphia. Another shooting. And we also heard that there were a ton of shootings in Philadelphia as well. Seems like shootings are just way, way, way up. And while this is all going on, and many of us are sitting back wondering why so many shootings are taking place, the protests haven't stopped. They have not stopped. The media just got bored of these stories because no one cares. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an easy example. I did a video on my main channel titled something about the left has torn down a statue of Thomas Jefferson. I think it got 500,000 views. And then there was some news. And then a day or two later, the leftists tore down George Washington. It's a very similar story, right? Well, I titled it the exact same way I would. Why? Because that was the intent, not to overhype it, but to just tell you what happened. The far left has destroyed a statue of George Washington. It got, I think, 300,000 views. For me, I talk about things that I think are important. So yesterday I talked about Trump's rally. It's nothing to do with conflict, crisis, on the ground protests. It's just what I thought was the most important story, things that were bubbling up and things that, were in the conversation as I see them. I have curated my list of Twitter people I follow. Based on that, I produce content on what I'm watching. Sometimes the stories are about civil unrest. Sometimes they're not. I think it's a very broad view of things. It could be wrong. It's just my personal perspective. What we're seeing now is, the example with my view count was specifically to say that the news media will put out a story saying protests in DC, and they'll get 1 million views. The next day they'll say protests in Portland, and they'll get 500,000. The next day they'll say protests in Chicago, 100,000. And then they say, enough. No one cares. We won't cover this. I'll still cover it if they're still doing it, right? So then I did another video about Ulysses S. Grant being torn down. At a certain point, however, the protests do dwindle in size and they become less relevant. And then I'm not really going to talk about it either. But I try to hold on to things that I think are important, like the tearing down of our founding fathers and past presidents. But the protests in Portland, they return for the 26th consecutive day. There are still protests in Seattle. The Chaz is ongoing, and there are still protests, I believe, all over the place. I mean, there were protests in Ohio only a few days ago. There were protests in Washington, D.C. The media won't tell you this. The media will highlight the shootings, though. The national level, won't. The news cycle will not be dominated by this. The national cycle became dominated by talk of Donald Trump and his rally size and the TikTok teens shutting him down. But they're not going to talk about the fact the protests have continued, demanding abolition of the police, the defunding of the police, while crime skyrockets, while shootings skyrocket, and the rest of us suffer. And now I'll bring you to something that I think is just maybe unrelated, but I don't think it is. Where we go from here. Let's take a look over at Europe. Looters chant Allahu Akbar during Stuttgart's worst ever riots that turned the city into a battlefield, as police reveal those involved were mainly young people with a migration background. I don't know why, for what reason, but it was one of the worst riots Germany has seen in a long time. And they say they don't believe it was politically motivated. So then what was the motivation? Perhaps it's the complete demoralization of the police. I know it's Germany. It's not the United States. They're not dealing with the same issues. But did you know that there were protests and riots taking place in the UK? That they were tearing down statues as well, and there were protests in France. So yeah, this news from the US reaches Europe, and we have a shared culture. So when the police become demoralized, people take advantage. Or perhaps it's that these people learned that when enough people come out to loot and riot, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. And so that's what we see overseas. I don't know if this is a trend for us. I don't know if this has anything to do with us, and I don't have a whole lot to say about it. The question I have is, to go back to the original point, if there is a storm on the horizon, what would that storm be? Top cops warn. More than one. Storm on the horizon. What is it? Is it more looting, more rioting, more shootings? Because the police have been berated and attacked. Small town police, which I've mentioned before, are not big city police. They're not the NYPD. They're not Chicago. Yet they are being attacked as well. And now we are going to see what happens in these big cities when your police don't want to respond and feel like they can't defend you because they'll put themselves at risk. An interesting point was made. There's a Reddit post about firefighters and EMTs being criticized for refusing to enter Seattle's Chaz after somebody got shot. And there are several posts from EMTs responding saying, I'm an EMT and I will never go into this place with, if it's not secured? And what do you think is going to happen now when these protests continue and police refuse to secure things? We're going to see the escalation. We're going to see people who don't want to come in and respond. We're going to see EMTs saying, I'm not going to stick my neck out and put my life at risk. The first and most important thing is that I remain safe. The police will respond and make sure the EMTs feel safe, but the police probably now are being told if you do your job, you're going to get in trouble. So why would they? And then the dominoes fall down one by one. Why would the EMTs? Why would the firefighters? What happens now when these far leftists go and torch a building? The firefighters say, I'm not going anywhere near that. There's a riot going on. No cops, not interested. They destroyed low-income housing in Minneapolis. How did that help the poor? It didn't. Oh, but it was an expression of rage, the language of the unheard. Sure, and it made it all worse for everybody. The people who funded the project, the taxpayers, as well as the people who could have lived there. It was a disaster. We need police, man. We do. And for all their problems, I think, we could call for reform. But there's a storm on the horizon. Call it what you want. Some professors have called it a civil war. I've alluded to as much, but I have because I've heard it from smarter people than I. I'm only telling you what I'm hearing from the people who are supposed to be predicting this. And that's what they're saying. We not only have professors, more than one, who track this kind of behavior, telling you some kind of civil war, but we now have top cops in NYC saying a storm is on the horizon. And shootings are on the rise. And liberals are buying guns in droves. And I got my receipt right here for all the guns I just bought. For self-defense. I don't want anything bad to happen, but everybody's scared. So they're buying weapons, probably for home defense. I got all the good stuff. Gun locker, security and everything. And it's because I'm worried about someone coming to my home and I want to be able to protect myself because the police can't do it. Let me just make that clear. I mean no disrespect to these cops, but they're being demoralized and attacked. And so long as these people keep saying they're the ones who are causing the problems, I'm going to have to take care of myself. I'm not going to be able to sit here and say, the cops will be fine. They'll come and protect me. I don't know that. They haven't been able to in many of these big cities. And if the police think a storm is on the horizon, then don't be surprised when people run out full speed to go buy guns. And don't be surprised with the expansion of cancel culture, movies being banned, books being banned, art being banned, people losing their jobs. Don't be surprised if there are many people, formerly liberal, who went out and bought a gun and when asked, say, oh, I hate Trump, I hate him. Yeah, don't look at me, I don't like the guy. But really they're thinking, if I say I do and I would support him, I'll lose my job. I'll be ostracized. So they don't. But come November, they will slam that button for Trump. That means the polls are skewed. That means fundraising is skewed. But it means people are terrified and they're buying guns. Liberals, formerly gun control people, are watching their cities be torn apart. And the police are warning them. Who do you think they're going to vote for? I guess we'll just see what happens next, as per usual. The next segment will be at 4 p.m. over at timcast.net. Check it out. It's my other channel, and I will see you all then.